Welcome to the Well Seasoned Librarian Podcast. This is Season 9, Episode 6, and I'm your host, Dean Jones. Today I have the pleasure of talking with Atava Garcia Swiecicki. She works as a clinical herbalist and teacher. She is the founder of the Ancestral Apothecary School of Herbal Folk and Indigenous Medicine, and she currently lives in Tewa Pueblo Territory in Albuquerque, New Mexico. She has a new book out called the Curanderx Toolkit, which includes more than 25 profiles of native and adopted plants of Baja and Alta California, and teaches you how to grow, know, and live them. I had a really great conversation with Atava, and I think you're going to enjoy it. I'm going to take you now to that. Welcome to the Well Seasoned Librarian Podcast. I'm your host, Dean Jones. Today, I'm talking with Atava Garcia Swiecicki, who has a school, Ancestral Apothecary School of Herbal Folk and Indigenous Medicine. She has a new book out, the Curanderx Toolkit. Atava, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Dean.
So the first question I have, I think, is the most, obvious one. At what point in your life did you realize that you were a healer?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think I've been asked that before. And I've thought about it a lot because I think we're in a time period where that role in a community, well, depending on how someone is living, I know there's definitely indigenous cultures, many on earth, where the healer is still a recognized role and an essential part of community. And I think it's also something that all people of all ancestral backgrounds have in our lineages, whether it was the midwives or the village herbalists of I could say of my Polish ancestors or my Mexican ancestors. But in contemporary times, at least due to modernization and colonization, all those things, I'll just say because of an assimilation, because of my life, the way I was raised, with ancestors from Mexico, ancestors who are Dene or Navajo, and also Polish and Hungarian. I'm the granddaughter of, or great-granddaughter of immigrants or detribalized people. So the way I was raised, it wasn't a recognized role in the family or the community to be a healer, right? You went to school, you went to college. Maybe the only possibility was you could be a doctor or a nurse. I'm 54, so even when I was a young adult, you probably saw this too, even these kind of paths of being like an acupuncturist or a naturopath or massage therapist, they weren't necessarily a obvious career option. I think that's it's changed in the last 20 years, right? So yeah, I just feel like I had a calling, but I didn't know how to identify it. I just, it showed up in my dreams. It showed up in what I was drawn to or attracted to in terms of what I wanted to learn. And when I first went to my first, when I went to my first herbal gathering in 1994, I just felt like I came home. It just felt very familiar, and even though it hadn't been something in my worldview before. So I just followed the thread of what I was drawn to and interested in, and that led me to study herbal medicine. It led me to study, actually the first complementary medicine practices I studied were based more in traditional Chinese medicine, acupressure, shiatsu, Tui Na. There was a school in Berkeley called the Acupressure Institute. So that really opened my mind to this holistic medicine universe. And then the herbal medicine, and then I met the first curandera, who was my teacher, Doña Enriqueta, in the late 90s. So it really just unfolded. I didn't set out to be I'm going to be a healer. It was just what unfolded. And also that word healer, I think I've also thought a lot about that as I've grown older and as I was writing. I think first and foremost, each of us needs to be our own healer. And I think that's something that is really important because a lot of us have been trained to give our power away to the doctor or whatever practitioner. We don't want to take responsibility for our health. And then there's so many causes underlying causes to why we're not well, that have to do with colonization and all that. But, and within that, we should be our own healer. And then there are people in communities or in the world who are drawn to serve others. And, as I do as an herbalist or as a, curandera. And I also like to say that the supreme healer is whatever we want to call it, universe, the divine, nature. Like, I think there's also a way that to be mindful of ego, of what we are actually doing, like really that force that makes something heal. Like, we can create causes and conditions, and we can love somebody and tend to them and give them the right herbs and give them a limpia. But that magic, which is healing, I think it's beyond any individual. So I told you that's a more complex answer, but yeah, it's something I think about a lot. So yeah, like, to summarize, as a young person, I was drawn to this path but didn't have a name for it, and it didn't really have any role models. I think things have changed so much since the advent of the internet and social media, just in terms of access and visibility of people who are walking these paths, whether it's an herbalist or curandera, Curanderx, or any traditional healer, or an acupuncturist, anybody from whatever background they come from. You can just Google or go on Instagram and find somebody who's doing that. But in my life, excuse me, I had to meet people in person.
Yeah.
Or the universe brought the right people into my path. I'll just say it that way.
I want to circle back to the herbal gathering. Like, was it a relief for you to kind of have like an epiphany and realize this was your path? This is what you wanted to do?
Yeah, I mean, it was exciting. I mean, I was in my early 20s, and I think those years are just about or I was in my mid 20s, just about self-exploration and trying this, trying that. Just learning about the world, right? Learning about the world and learning about what I, as an individual may be called to do. So yeah, it just felt exciting. Like, I finally found something that I just felt passionate about. Like, when I was in college, I had a hard time really sinking my roots into any major until I found feminist studies, because that I felt like really, I could literally see myself in it, right? It wasn't so abstract, or so disconnected for me. And again, that was in the 80s, and it was when there was a lot of very exciting feminism coming out, like Audre Lorde and Sri Moraga, Gloria Anzaldúa. So a lot of women of color, queer women, writing about their experience. So that was the only thing in college of the majors that I felt resonant with. But in college, there wasn't a class on herbal medicine or ancestral medicine or all of that. So I think it just took time.
You mentioned your degree in feminism. I wanted to ask how that played into your spiritual path, and what leaders in the Bay Area kind of like helped kind of feed your spiritual path in that regard.
Yeah, what I like about feminism, I think of things like the personal is political. I'm not sure who said that. Maybe that was Gloria Steinem. I'm sorry if I'm misquoting. Or Audre Lorde, who said, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house, or self-care is something like, she says, self-care is an act of political warfare. I mean, really, I think some of the writers at that time and before that were really unpacking and identifying all of the layers of well, I guess at that time it may be patriarchy and racism. I don't think there was as much conversation about colonization, probably in indigenous communities. But when you find yourself a young woman feeling empowered to just like be something in the world, and then you knock on all these doors that say, no, you can't do this. Or like, when I actually started at college, I wanted to be a math major. My father was a mathematician, but I couldn't survive in classes that were 99% men.
Yeah.
So just, just the intrinsic sexism or whatever privilege, all the way those played out. So I think it just gave me a framework, the feminism for my spirituality based on, the female experience. And, this is also when women were writing like about the goddess, and it was when Starhawk was writing about reclaiming magic. I mean, all of those books were coming out kind of dismantling patriarchal religion, right?
Yeah.
And saying, no, actually, all of us come from, or many of us from cultures where there was at least female practitioners, whether we call them priestesses or witches or whatever. So that really informed me, and all the books of that time. I don't know if there was a particular one. I mean, I know I read all of the books by Starhawk when they came out in the 80s. And, as I would meet other people, a lot of the people who I felt like were my mentors were just women in my own community. I mean, I was just blessed to connect to a community at a young age, led primarily by Black and Indigenous and Latinx women. So I would say they really became my mentors and role models, and many of them are still in my life today. So it was really not so much like an icon leader, but like the people who were around me in the world, and practicing community ritual or ceremony, or just being in community.
We've seen a real big change. I mean, in my lifetime, I've seen herbal medicine or herbal healing really change in its common perception. But do you think that perception is still maybe skewed? Because I mean, I see people that, like, for instance, in the Bay Area, you can go into some drugstores and get herbal medicine, and there are more stores where you can buy herbal medicine, and people will go in and consult with people seriously. It's not like they're just going into an occult store and buying stuff. It's they're going into a store specifically to buy herbal medicine. And many people in like Kaiser's, for instance, has people who do herbal medicine. So it's more respected now. But do you think there's still a misconception of what it is?
Yes, definitely. I mean, it's something that I think, as what they say, follow the money. As there's more money in herbal medicine to be made, then it has become part of capitalism and driven by companies that maybe are putting profit before sustainable practices or the proper amount of education. That said, I think I'm glad there's just more general awareness and consciousness about herbalism. One of the first misconceptions that has existed as long as I've been a practicing herbalist is people think, oh, I don't want to take this medication for my blood pressure. I'll just take an herb instead. So this perception that looks at herbs as just basically substitutes for a pharmaceutical agent. And that really does a lot of disservice to herbs, which are plants. They have, hundreds of phytochemicals in their makeup. They're part of the earth. They grow in the ecosystem. They come from tradition and culture and an age-old relationship between whatever plant it is and the people that in the community that in the culture that plant comes from, in terms of spiritual connection, just personal connection, cultural connection. So I think to just substitute a plant for a drug is just like a percentage of what the plant does, and they don't work like drugs. Like a lot of drugs are pharmaceuticals. When I say drugs, are derived from plants, and they're highly concentrated and they're very potent. It's like the sledgehammer effect. Whereas plants also are part of the whole bigger picture of holistic medicine, where it's about ecology. It's about gently shifting the ecology of our body. And so people may want to say someone has diabetes and like, I don't want to be on insulin. What plant can I take? It's like, well, you could take this herb, but you're still going to have to exercise and decrease your carbohydrate intake. So we can't just like substitute the plant and then again, still not take responsibility for the things we need to change. And also for me as an herbalist, so much of the magic of herbalism is about building a relationship with that plant, about growing it from seed, you know, watching the little sprout come up, watching it flower, seeing what pollinators like it, harvesting it, making it into medicine. Like it's a whole culture of relationship to the plants and therefore also to the environment. Like herbalists, we're very aware, as are farmers and anyone living close to the earth. Many indigenous communities were acutely aware of climate change because we see the impact. We see how things change, how plants that maybe used to grow in a certain season now can't, or you know, we are having to change the plants we grow because of the impact. So it's much more than just this powdered pill in a capsule at Walmart that you don't know about its story. I think plants are also very much connected to story. Like this is a plant my grandmother used, or this is a plant that, you know, my culture uses, and food and medicine. So I think that's the one thing, is that, you know, plants are a whole universe. Herbal medicine, each one is a whole universe with, you know, history, story, culture, environment, ecology, and to just look at it as a drug based, you know, substitute is losing what I think is the most important part about herbalism.
It's really weird because I'll observe, I think, you know, I see how social media affects the idea of like herbal healing. And like, I see people like, I'll have a coworker, they're drinking some kind of concoction with turmeric or ginger or whatever. And like, I'm like, oh, what are you doing? They're like, oh, I'm taking this because it makes me healthy. And I'm like, oh, how so? And they're like, I don't know. I saw it on social media on TikTok and it says it makes me healthy. And I'm like, so you're just drinking it? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, all right. And like, there seems like this unconscious, it's like, I'll attribute to like what people were taking aspirin. Like, why are you taking aspirin? I don't know. I heard that it's good for you if you have heart issues. Well, okay. Did the doctor tell you to do that? No. They're just doing it. And it's like, there's this weird thing that people in society do. They're just like, they'll do stuff, but they don't really, there's a disconnect. Do you see that often as working in your field?
Definitely, which is why I love to be a teacher and an educator, because I think everybody who is an herbal consumer, you don't have to be calling yourself an herbalist, but everybody would benefit from a little bit of education and understanding about plants, about their energy, about how they work, about how they interact with our body, about when they're the right plant for us to take, when they're what we call contraindicated, we shouldn't be taking it. And yeah, I see that a lot. I mean, fortunately, a lot of plants are pretty benign and beneficial. So if everybody starts drinking ginger tea, that's mostly a good thing. But for example, someone is on like blood thinners, and you know, you wouldn't necessarily want to be drinking lots of ginger tea because it would be contraindicated. Yeah. So I just think, along with the excitement to bring plants into our lives, I would like to pair that with education, which is also why I teach, and it's why I wrote my book, because I think that that component is really essential. And without, you know, we can make mistakes, or, you know, very worst case scenario, do harm to ourselves. And this happens every once in a while, where someone, you know, literally overdoses on whatever herb it is because they think it's a good thing and they're drinking 10 cups a day. Licorice is one that's been misused, and suddenly their blood pressure is skyrocketing because you shouldn't be drinking 10 cups a day of licorice tea, right? It can elevate blood pressure. So the education.
You can get poisoned, I think, from eating too much licorice candy, right? I mean, it would be a larger amount, but people do sometimes go to those extremes, right?
Yeah, what I know about licorice is it can elevate the blood pressure. Maybe, mm-hmm. I don't know, it may be also poison. But yeah, it's just like anything in excess can kill you. I mean, and this is an old herbal saying, and I don't know what culture it comes from, but it's everything everything around us is either medicine or poison. It has to do with the dosage, the timing, the frequency. We could look at something like homeopathy, which uses minute dilutions of literal poisons, like poison oak. Like you take a homeopathic remedy, poison oak, for a treatment for poison oak, or if you have rashes, right? But you wouldn't want to like make a tea of poison oak. So it's just about knowing, it goes back to education and knowing that just because they're plants doesn't mean that they're 100% without side effect. I mean, some plants are very toxic. Some plants, if you have a little bit, it could make you very sick. But again, a skilled herbalist may know, like, okay, this is a plant we only use topically, or we only use it as a homeopathic remedy.
You have a school, which is the Ancestral Apothecary School of Herbal Folk and Indigenous Medicine. When did you start the school, and what was the catalyst that helped you decide to create it?
Yes, well, newsflash is I just transferred the ownership to a new person, but I'm still a part of it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I founded it and probably like in the early 2000s. I don't have an exact date. Like I started using Ancestral Apothecary as the name of my business around 2003. And even prior to that, I was teaching classes. So my school, I never set out to, I'm going to have an herbal school. I started teaching out of my yard, out of my house, in my backyard, small classes. And then the classes grew in size, they grew in frequency. And then I had more classes. And then I started bringing in other teachers. And then suddenly it really just was like, oh, this is now a school. So, and I was really, again, really following the energy of the community, because people would ask, okay, I would offer like an introduction to herbal medicine that was like a month long. And they're like, well, we want it longer. So I'd offer it 3 months. Oh, we want a year-long training. So I'd offer a year-long training. So it really was, my decision to create a school was really just based on the interest and of my community, and my school. The school did and will continue to really also had a niche of serving Black, Indigenous, people of color, people of the global majority, people queer, trans, non-binary. In the herbal community nationally, like those herbal spaces were less common. And even in the Bay Area, which was always kind of a surprise to me, it could be such a diverse, multicultural space, and still some of the herbal schools that existed really were kind of run by white European people, and really serving more of that community where people of color would be minority. So that also really always inspired me, because wanting to have those spaces, because it goes back to herbal education and serving our communities, like and also like if we would have healing clinics, free healing clinics, and we'd be gathering all the herbalists who would serve, volunteer at these clinics. And a lot of the times it was just through an organization called the Healing Clinic Collective. We'd be serving people who were like recently incarcerated or living in shelters. We really tried to reach marginalized communities without homes. And if these communities were, there was a strong African-American presence, like I would want a Black herbalist to be there to serve members of the community, to really have people of that community bringing the medicine to one another. And that was actually sometimes hard to find. And so I realized, just in terms of the greater herbal movement and nationally, that I was very committed to training more BIPOC herbalists to be, proficient practitioners, so then they could go out into their communities. So that was really the catalyst. And the other thing about, because I named it the School of Herbal Folk and Indigenous Medicine, is the herbalism in the last, 30 years in the United States had a bias towards looking at plants from, again, a more Western lens.
Yeah.
And I really was like, wait a second, like, what about the cultural practices, the ways, whoever we are, whether I'm, and I'll just speak for myself, how did my Mexican ancestors relate to these plants? What were the rituals? How were they used in food? How were they part of the culture? But I could also say that about my Polish ancestors. And so that like, and so sometimes that's called folk medicine, and sometimes it's indigenous medicine. It just depends on the community and the history and the identity of the community. So, but I really wanted to also center on that, because again, I felt like that part of our relationship with plants as human beings from whatever culture we are, that was also important to me to center in the herbal education. So those are things that really inspired the school. And throughout the years, I would invite in like an herbalist from the Philippines who taught like Filipinx herbal medicine, or bring in a lot of curanderos from Mexico, brought in healers from Nigeria, brought in different Native American people, who would talk about the use from their particular cultural perspective. So I really wanted to create a space that people from different cultural ancestral backgrounds could share the way that plant medicine was in their culture.
This episode is sponsored by Culinary Historians of Northern California, a Bay Area educational group dedicated to the study of food, drink, and culture in human history. To learn more about this organization and their work, please visit their website at www.chnorcal.org. I was reading, doing research for my questions for you, and I saw something that was very interesting that I'd like to ask you about. You have your own type of healing art called deep genealogy coaching. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Definitely. So that comes out of my work that is related to herbal medicine and curanderismo, but also different. When I was, it was in the early 2000s, I went to Naropa University, used to have a campus in Oakland.
Mm-hmm.
That was also connected to the University of Creation Spirituality, which had been started by Matthew Fox. I don't know if you know him and his work.
Oh, yeah.
So Naropa, which is based in Boulder, and University of Creation Spirituality kind of joined forces and opened this campus in Oakland. And through that, they offered a master's in indigenous mind. And that is where, and I, similarly to how I was called to herbalism, I was called to that program. And through the work of another mentor of mine, Dr. Apila Colorado, she had created this program for people of whatever their ancestral background was, to have a space to connect to what she would call the indigenous mind, like what was our culture, our cosmology, our practices, our rituals before colonization. So, depending on a person, this may be it may be alive in our culture today, it may be a few generations back, it may be many generations back. So in that program, I started to study, or started to engage with my father's lineage, which was Polish ancestors, and made a couple trips to Poland, and was also going to Poland, really trying to find the traditional cultural medicine. And when I was there as a student, I was in the inaugural class, and then I stayed on for many years, just supporting the next cohorts that were coming behind me. So I really learned about this process of of what it was like for someone to kind of reconnect with their ancestors. And so many years later, when I was just thinking of my offerings, I was doing that with my clients one-on-one, but I thought I just need a name to identify this service. And this is something that I've also seen grow in interest over the years, is more people are interested in ancestral connection, ancestral healing, understanding the patterns and the history that is in our lineage and how that plays out in our lives individually, in our families, and in society. So deep genealogy is a way to look at our roots, our ancestral roots, but in a way that's not just the names and the dates, but it's like, what were the gifts? Like one of my, I have a like intake form. So one of the questions is like, what are the gifts that are in your family? So, and someone, it might be music, right? Like I'm musical, my father is musical, my grandfather. And I also ask what are the challenges? So we see things like alcoholism or mental illness or whatever it is, but then also and then looking at it bigger of like, what is the history of my ancestors to people to place? Like, are we descendant from people who were colonizers or oppressors? And what my mentor Pila would always say is often we are the colonized and the colonizer. Like we often have both. So many of us have both, and then to different percentages, right? So, with doing all that work, my intention was always that people could literally reroute back to their history, to find ways to transform, resolve, face the challenges, face some of the very ugly history that our ancestors were involved in. Really depend whether we were the enslaved or the slaveholder, right? Or a mixture of both, like really having to face that, finding ways to transform the energy so that we're not just like continually repeating the past, but we're also bringing back the gifts that our ancestors left us. Because that was something that I've always thought about, is in terms of medicine, is that for hundreds or thousands of years, our ancestors could have been in relationship with certain plants, certain practices. And then there's a break, but that's immigration or it's war or it's genocide or it's enslavement. There's some reason that maybe those plant medicine practices were interrupted. But finding a way to reach back and kind of reconnect with what our ancestors were doing and kind of bring that back into our lives. And then again, pass on to future generations. So that's a lot of what deep genealogy is. I really allow each client to navigate, to set their own intentions of why they're coming, why they're doing this work, because it's very personal. Like I know I had one client, she had lost her grandmother at a young age and just felt like she never really had that resolution, never really got to honor, never really got to work through some of that. And then, and what her grandmother brought from her ancestries. And then other people, it's like, I come from this lineage, there's all this hard material and I'm finding a way to reconcile it. So I do a combination of just talking, guided meditation, ritual. I bring in plant medicine, dream work, really a lot of ways to just engage in all levels with the person, to support whatever their intention is with, in relationship to their ancestors.
I'm very excited to talk about your new book. It's out now with the wonderful publisher Heyday Books, local. The Curanderx Toolkit, Reclaiming Ancestral Latinx Plant Medicine and Rituals for Healing. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about the book and why you chose to write it?
Definitely. Thank you. Yeah, it's been an exciting year to have this book come out. And the book came from my own work, my own reconnecting with the ancestral practices of my Mexican ancestors, really specifically around our traditional healing, which can be called curanderismo, or the art of healing. So I, back when I was a baby herbalist, also started studying with different Mexican curanderas and myself started to learn those practices and engage with them. So again, in my family, because of assimilation, a lot of those practices weren't alive and present in my family, although for many Mexican American Latinx people, that the transmission has not been broken. Practices are still very present. So I started a class in 2011 of the same name, although then it was called the Curanderx Toolkit, really just wanting to create a class centered on herbal medicine, but from this perspective, from the cultural perspective of Mexican American curanderismo. So I taught the herbal section, and then I brought in my elders or maestras, teachers or colleagues to teach some of their specialties. So some of them may be the massage, or maybe a limpia, which is an energetic cleansing, or danza azteca. So I started that in 2011, and then, the class continued to be taught twice a year since then. Over those years, I just amassed a lot of curriculum, handouts, etc. And I was like, wow, I have so much material. It could be a book. And also what started to happen, this was pre-2020, pre-pandemic, these classes were taught primarily in Oakland. Huchin, I had this small office on Grand Avenue, which could fit about 15 students. So the classes were very intimate. And I would be invited to teach outside of the Bay Area. I was invited to Los Angeles. I was invited to Washington, Santa Cruz, Wisconsin. But what happened is more people became interested in the class than I could physically travel to, or who could be in the Bay Area. And this, again, was before everything went online.
Yeah.
Going online as a class was beneficial to people who were outside of the Bay Area, who always wanted to take the class. Like now I continue to teach that class, and I literally, this last cycle, I had people from all the way from Hawaii to the East Coast. So all of the time zones in the US, or so-called US. So I was blessed in 2018 to be approached by who now was my editor, Martina from Heyday, who said, I was having an herbal fair through Ancestral Apothecary School. We used to have around this time, holiday herbal fairs. So all the students could sell their products to the community. And that was also on Grand Avenue. And Martina just came in, and I guess she just saw this amazing, vibrant community of herbalists and medicine makers. And she's like, have you ever thought of writing a book? I was like, actually, I have. So I compiled, to write a proposal. I had to put that all together. But Heyday was amazing. They were so supportive and really allowed me to birth the vision the way I wanted it to be. I'm so grateful. So at that point, I think part of the intention of the book was just to be able to reach a wider audience than the people I could actually teach in person or online. I mean, that is, I always say the class started out as a prayer, and so is the book. And the intention of the book is that it can just reach anyone who really it can benefit, it can touch, it can share, it can be a supportive resource for people navigating just life, healing, tragedy, hardship, illness, right? It can just be, especially for Latinx people, but I do think the book can speak and be a resource for everybody. I think if people are outside of the culture, it's also just important to learn and to understand a cultural medicine. If it's, for example, in California, it's almost a Latinx majority. And so for people, whether someone's a therapist or a medical or doctor, just to understand, have cultural awareness and sensitivity of other cultural practices, or ones that are very, very around us in our communities, but maybe we don't have access to the education to understand, that everything's this way we call medicine, that's just about drugs and surgery, and it's just one way of looking at healing, one slice of the picture of all the ways that are existent in the world.
I want to, for our listeners who are not familiar with the term, I want to ask you if you can define the term curandera.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, yeah. Well, in Spanish, the word curar just means to heal. So a curandera, curandero, Curanderx is just one who heals. So, I mean, it really basically translates to healer. And it's a specific, again, to a culture. So again, this is to really, it's a word that's used throughout Latin America, Latinx diaspora. So it would differentiate, it would identify that someone is practicing in a way that comes from their background and their culture. The Curanderx, so this class started as Curanderx Toolkit and morphed into Curanderx, really to be very intentionally inclusive of non-binary, non-gender conforming trans people, because Spanish is a very gendered language. And if you say curandera, it's female, curandero, male. And so the X is like, it's for everybody. And it's also, I like Curanderx because it also is like a contemporary word that can identify the people who are practicing at this time in, history. I'm different than those who are my teachers, my maestros, who are really maybe in a community, very like really serving their community in this way that we could put traditionally. And now we're different. We're a different generation. The way knowledge is transmitted is different. Like we can go to classes, we learn from books. It's not just an oral transmission. So I like it. It's a contemporary word as a way to identify at least myself and those who are a part of this movement.
Part of your book deals with healing people of the effects of the white dominant patriarchy. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I've thought a lot about, the self-help movement, or really just a lot of the healing books that have been out, really, we could say the past 30, 40 years. Like a lot of them, it will be like, well, just have a positive attitude and say this affirmation and you'll be cured. And what they're lacking is historical context, socio-political context, which are the root of why so many people or communities are not well. We could just talk about like Northern Native people, which I have ancestry, just the impact of colonization and, massacring the buffalo, which are a primary food source, introducing white flour, white sugar, creating communities that are food deserts, right, where people don't have access to healthy food. So if there's a high rate of diabetes, it's not just one person's fault. Like this is literally the legacy of colonization and genocide. And we could go through many communities, especially BIPOC communities, and look at the same thread of, so there's that. So I feel like I just wanted to say it's not as easy. We can't just say an affirmation and then we're better. Like part of it is unpacking the causes and also realizing, and I saw this quote, realizing that actually society is sick.
Yeah.
Us to be, if an individual is not well, I mean, and this goes beyond even gender or racial identity, like just our environment alone is so toxic that if any of us has cancer, we can't say, oh, I'm to blame. It's like we didn't choose to drink this water that's contaminated with whatever lead or uranium. But in terms of the dominant, white supremacy and patriarchy, like I think, or we could say homophobia, transphobia, like the impact that has on a person's health who has an identity that's not that, it is great. It's huge. So I think at first to understand that, to identify that. And then I feel like the book gives us tools to work through or to release, I would say, to all the layers of trauma, all the layers of injury to self, to body, to spirit. And I also consider myself a healer activist, like by teaching people skills like, okay, the world is stressful. If, I'm a queer person of color, I'm always going to be in the world with a certain there's always gonna be a certain harshness, but I want to teach people like, well, these are herbs you can bring into your life as allies that can support your nervous system, that can support your immune system, that can help you to create this ritual to release the energy of, something traumatic that happened. So it's my intention is that the book is a resource so that people, again, that's why I call it Toolkit, that they have tools, that they have skills, so that they're more empowered to navigate the world and all of its complexities, all of its difficulties, all of its, atrocities, but have resources which I believe go back to what the earth gives us freely, generously, the plants, the flowers, the water, the sunshine, that we can tap into that as a resource for our resilience.
I want to ask you one last question. What's next for you?
Thank you. Well, I'm hoping to write another book. I mean, I'm in a big shift because, like I said, I just sold the school. I will continue to be a part of it. I'll continue to teach the Curanderx class. It's taught in the spring and fall, now on Zoom with some in-person options. I'll continue to teach. I hope to teach some classes in person in New Mexico and also become more integrated into the healer Curanderx herbalist community here in Albuquerque in New Mexico. I moved here in 2020, so it was a really not a favorable time to build community. So I hope in my ideal world, I would be working at a clinic that served, again, low income, marginalized people as an herbalist. But I do have another book that I'm actually in conversation with another publisher that I want to write on the path to reconnecting with ancestral medicine. So a lot of what we talked about, or I shared about the deep genealogy work, I've had the blessing to support people through this process of reconnecting with their ancestral medicine. And I think it's something that deserves to be written about. And also that book would really be, the audience would be all people of all backgrounds, including people who have, European ancestry. And I can speak for more than half of my own self lineages who may be have just less clues or even understanding of how to reconnect with our ancestral medicine. And what does that look like? I mean, there's, it's different for everybody from Europe. And that's what I always say is one of the first things is, instead of claiming this identity white, be like, okay, well, are you Irish American? Are you Italian American? Are you German American? Are you Polish American? Like, every one of those places is a different culture, different practices, different relationship to land. So that's one of the things I really liked writing, and I hope to continue writing. I actually have at least 3 other books in my mind, but one at a time.
I always love to hear that. Atava, I want to really thank you for being on the podcast. I've loved getting a chance to talk to you. Thank you for being here, and I hope to have you on the program again.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you for your questions. They're very thoughtful.
That was my conversation with Atava Garcia Swiecicki. Her new book, The Curanderx Toolkit, is available through all better bookstores and all retail chains. We additionally have links to it in the bio. On Monday, we're going to be speaking with author Sarah Gailey. She's written works such as Just Like Home, Eat the Rich, Magic of Liars, and more. I had a great time talking to Sarah, and I know you're going to love that interview. Talk to us here in the new year on Monday, and check out that interview with Sarah Gailey. I hope you're all having a really wonderful holiday season, and I hope to see you on the new year with many more interviews with some really great guests. Until then, Happy New Year, and keep on cooking.